Billionaire stunned as her daughter asked to sit with a single dad, then learned his seal passed. The grand ballroom of the Sterling Hotel glittered beneath 1,000 crystal lights. Politicians, investors, celebrities, and business leaders filled the room, all dressed in expensive gowns and tailored suits. Waiters moved silently between marble columns, carrying silver trays filled with champagne. At the center of it all stood Victoria Hale. A billionaire by 42, Victoria was known across the country as the woman who never lost. She had built Hale Technologies from a struggling startup into a global empire. Newspapers called her the Iron Woman of Wall Street. But Victoria cared very little about what newspapers called her. That evening, she was focused on one person only. Her 8-year-old daughter, Emily. Emily stood beside her mother in a pale blue dress, looking completely out of place among the powerful adults. She had been unusually quiet since arriving at the charity gala. Victoria bent down. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Emily nodded, but her eyes wandered across the room. Then suddenly, she pointed. "Mom." Victoria followed her finger. Across the ballroom, near a small table beside the service entrance, sat a man wearing an old navy blue suit. It was clean and neatly pressed, but obviously inexpensive. Beside him sat a little boy, perhaps 7 years old. The man was alone. Emily tugged gently on her mother's hand. "Can I sit with them?" Victoria blinked. "With who?" "That dad and his son." Victoria looked again. She immediately recognized the uncomfortable truth. The man didn't belong there. At least, not according to the invisible rules of rooms like this. He wasn't surrounded by executives. Nobody was shaking his hand. Nobody was asking for photographs. His shoes were worn, and his tie looked like it had been borrowed. Victoria frowned. "Emily, there are plenty of children here. But he's sitting alone." Before Victoria could stop her, Emily slipped away. "Emily." Heads turned as the billionaire's daughter walked across the ballroom. Victoria followed quickly, embarrassed and irritated. Emily stopped beside the stranger's table. "Hi," she said. "Can I sit here?" The little boy stared at her. The man looked surprised. Then he smiled. "Of course." Emily pulled out the empty chair and sat down. Victoria arrived seconds later. "Emily, darling, I'm so sorry." But the man stood politely. "It's all right." Victoria looked at him closely. He had kind eyes, though they seemed tired. A thin scar ran along his jaw. His hands were rough and marked, the hands of someone who had spent years doing difficult work. "I'm Victoria Hale," she said automatically. The man nodded. "I know." That answer caught her off guard. "And you are?" "Daniel Brooks." No introduction followed. No attempt to impress her. Victoria glanced at Emily. "We should probably return to our table." But Emily shook her head. "I'm talking to Noah." She pointed at the little boy. Noah smiled shyly. Victoria sighed. 5 minutes. Daniel looked uncomfortable. "You really don't have to let her stay. We were about to leave anyway." "Why?" Emily asked. Daniel looked toward the ballroom. "This isn't exactly our world." Emily tilted her head. "Why not?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Because people like me don't usually get invited to places like this." Victoria folded her arms. "Then why are you here?" Daniel hesitated. "My sister works for the charity. She had an extra invitation." Victoria noticed something in his voice. Pride. But also embarrassment. She suddenly felt guilty. Before she could respond, Emily spoke again. "Are you Noah's dad?" "Yes." "Where's his mom?" The room seemed to grow quieter around the table. Daniel looked at his son. She passed away 2 years ago. Emily's face changed immediately. Oh. Noah looked down at his hands. Victoria felt a sharp pain in her chest. I'm sorry, Emily whispered. Daniel nodded. Thank you. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Emily reached across the table and gently held Noah's hand. Victoria watched her daughter. Emily had always been sensitive. But tonight, something seemed different. Perhaps she had simply seen what the adults had ignored. Two people sitting alone. Daniel cleared his throat. Your mother should take you back now. Emily looked at Victoria. Can Noah come sit with us? Victoria almost laughed. But when she looked at Noah's hopeful face, she stopped. Of course, she said. Daniel immediately shook his head. No. Thank you, but we shouldn't. Victoria looked at him. Why not? Daniel stood straighter. Because your table is for your guests. And now you're my guests. He hesitated. Victoria smiled slightly. Please. For the first time that evening, Daniel looked genuinely uncertain. Eventually, he nodded. As Daniel and Noah followed Victoria toward the main table, whispers began. Who was he? Why was Victoria Hale walking with that man? A famous investor leaned toward another guest. Do you know him? No idea. Victoria heard them. Normally, she would have ignored the gossip. Tonight, it irritated her. She sat Daniel beside her. That decision would change everything. At first, Daniel barely spoke. When guests asked what he did for a living, he answered simply. I work in security. Several people lost interest immediately. But Victoria noticed something unusual. Whenever Daniel spoke, he listened more than he talked. He noticed the servers struggling with heavy trays. He noticed an elderly guest almost slipping near the dance floor. Before anyone else reacted, Daniel quietly stepped forward and helped her. Then he returned to his chair as if nothing had happened. Victoria studied him. Security? She asked quietly. Daniel nodded. What kind? Private security. Mostly. Mostly? Daniel looked down at his glass of water. I'm between things right now. Victoria understood. He was unemployed. Or nearly unemployed. You have experience? A little. She smiled. A little? Daniel finally smiled back. Enough. Before Victoria could ask another question, a loud crash came from the far side of the ballroom. Everyone turned. A waiter had dropped a tray. Several guests jumped. Daniel didn't. He had already turned toward the sound before anyone else. His body changed. His shoulders tightened. His eyes scanned every entrance. Victoria noticed. Then another sound came. Not a crash. A sharp electronic alarm. The ballroom lights flickered. Guests began murmuring nervously. Hotel security rushed toward the doors. Daniel stood. Stay here, he said. Victoria looked up. What is it? I don't know. But sit down. Security is handling it. Daniel looked toward the emergency exit. No. There was something in his voice that made Victoria stop arguing. Daniel turned to Noah. Buddy, stay with Emily. Noah nodded. Daniel walked quickly toward the side of the ballroom. Victoria watched him speak briefly with a hotel guard. The guard shook his head. Daniel said something else. Then the guard suddenly stepped aside. Minutes later, the alarm stopped. Guests relaxed. The event continued. Daniel returned to the table. Victoria stared at him. What happened? Faulty alarm sensor. You're sure? Yes. How did you know? Daniel paused. Experience. Victoria leaned closer. What kind of experience? Daniel looked uncomfortable. Nothing important. But just then, an older man at a nearby table stood abruptly. His champagne glass fell from his hand. He stared at Daniel. Wait. Daniel froze. The older man slowly walked closer. Victoria recognized him immediately. Senator Robert Langford. He pointed at Daniel. Daniel Brooks? Daniel sighed. Hello, Senator. Victoria looked between them. You know each other? Langford stared in disbelief. Know him? He turned toward Victoria. Do you know who this man is? Daniel spoke sharply. Please don't. But the senator ignored him. This man saved my son's life. The ballroom seemed to pause. Victoria stared at Daniel. What? Langford pulled out his phone. He searched for something. Then he showed Victoria an old photograph. A group of military men stood beside a helicopter. Daniel was among them. Younger. Stronger. Wearing military gear. Victoria looked at Daniel. Langford spoke quietly. My son was a journalist embedded overseas. His convoy was attacked. Daniel and his team went back for him. Daniel said nothing. They were ordered to move forward, Langford continued. But Daniel refused to leave my son behind. Victoria looked at Daniel. You were military? Daniel nodded once. Langford's voice became emotional. He wasn't just military. He looked around the room. This man was a Navy SEAL. Silence. The whispers began again. But now they were different. Daniel stood immediately. Senator, enough. Victoria couldn't move. Everything suddenly made sense. The way he watched the exits. The way he reacted to the alarm. The scars. The calm. The discipline. Daniel looked at her. I left years ago. Why? His expression darkened. Because sometimes you survive things that don't really leave you. Victoria understood that he didn't want to continue. So she didn't ask. But later that evening, she found him outside the hotel. Daniel stood alone beneath the city lights. Noah and Emily were inside, eating dessert. Victoria approached slowly. You could have told me. Daniel gave a tired smile. Would it have changed anything? She thought about that question. Then she answered honestly. Yes. Daniel looked disappointed. Victoria continued. I probably would have treated you differently. He nodded. Exactly. The words hit her harder than she expected. Victoria looked toward the ballroom. All her life, she had judged people by accomplishments, titles, wealth, and reputation. Daniel had entered that room with none of those things visible. So she had almost dismissed him. Her daughter had not. Emily had simply seen a lonely father and his lonely son. And she had chosen kindness. Victoria looked back at Daniel. Emily saw something I didn't. Daniel smiled. Kids usually do. The following week, Victoria called Daniel. She offered him a position as head of security for Hale Technologies. Daniel refused. Twice. Finally, Victoria asked him to meet her for coffee. Why don't you want the job? Daniel looked through the window. Because I don't want to spend my life protecting another corporation. Victoria nodded. What do you want? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, a life for my son. That answer changed her plans. 3 months later, Victoria Hale announced the creation of a new foundation. Its mission was simple. to help veterans transition into civilian life and provide support for military families. Daniel refused to let the foundation carry his name. But he agreed to help build it. And slowly, he began helping other veterans find work, housing, and purpose. Noah started smiling more. Emily and Noah became best friends. And Victoria began changing too. She still ran a billion-dollar company. She still made difficult decisions. But she started noticing the people she had once overlooked. The janitor. The exhausted waitress. The quiet employee sitting alone. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary person in the room isn't standing beneath the brightest light. Sometimes, they're sitting alone at a forgotten table. And it takes the honesty of a child to see them. One evening, months later, Victoria watched Emily and Noah playing in the garden. Daniel stood beside her. "You know," Victoria said, "I thought I was teaching Emily how the world works." Daniel smiled. "And?" Victoria looked at her daughter. "Turns out, she was teaching me." Daniel nodded. Across the garden, Emily called out, "Mom! Daniel! Come play!" Victoria laughed. Daniel looked uncertain. Then Victoria smiled at him. "Go ahead, Navy SEAL." Daniel shook his head. "Don't start." For the first time in years, he laughed freely. And as the sun set over the city, Victoria understood something money had never taught her. A person's worth is not measured by the clothes they wear, the money they have, or the seat they occupy. Sometimes, the person sitting alone carries a story of courage the world knows nothing about. And sometimes, one small act of kindness is all it takes to bring that story to light.